Welcome to Leadership Reimagined, where game-changing conversations are reshaping the world of work. I'm Janice Ellig, the CEO and founder of Ellig Group, Executive Search Advisors, where we are reimagining search from our long-standing commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. On today's episode, Higher Education in Crisis, Leading Forward Together, I am honored to have as my guest Bruce Harreld, the University of Iowa's 21st president. Now in his fifth year, leading the second largest university in the state, President Harreld has a unique background in business, consulting, and academia, experiences that are particularly needed during these unprecedented times. His business background includes former president and board member of Boston Market, board member of Boston Consulting Group, and executive leadership positions at IBM and Kraft. As an esteemed leader in academia, he served on the faculty of Harvard Business School, as well as an adjunct professor at the Kellogg School of Management, where Bruce developed the first ever MBA course on strategic use of information technology. As the recipient of many honors and an award-winning author, we have much to learn from President Harreld, how to be a leader in higher education during COVID-19. Welcome, President Harreld. Thank you for taking time from what I know is a very busy schedule these days.
Well, thank you, Janice. It's good to be here. I'm honored, in fact. You've been just phenomenal in your career, obviously, what you're doing here with your organization, but also, I think very importantly, people should know what you're doing behind the scenes here at the university in terms of scholarships and mentorship for a very significant number of women. So thank you very, very much for that.
Well, thank you for that, Bruce. And we are trying to get more women at the upper echelons of corporate America and academia. And you're doing a good job there with so many women in leadership positions, including the president of the Center for Advancement, Lynette Marshall, and others who report to you in the university. So thank you for that. But these are really difficult times on campus. You've been on many college campuses and now leading at the University of Iowa. Can you give us some of those global and domestic challenges that we're facing in higher education?
Well, I'll try, and I'll try to be brief, but let me just introduce a whole series of issues. And I must say, the issues in the United States are different than the issues in Europe, and the issues in Asia are different still. Purdue is a public institution. I studied engineering there. My father did before me. My wife did as well. And so I'm a product of public higher education. And as I look at that whole marketplace, it's a lot of challenges. And it hasn't been going on for just the last year or two. It is, in fact, been going on for 25 years. And the more I looked at that in my days of retirement, the more I said, we really need to think about reimagining, if you will, how we approach public higher education in the United States. Because I think public higher education has been vital to lifting up a number of different underrepresented groups in our society. And I think it's in many ways the core of our society, core of our democracy, if you will. And so, and let me just tick off. I mean, obviously right now we are dealing with a very serious series of issues around COVID-19. And it is, we've been dealing with it now for 6 months. And I think the mistake that I have made, and I think a lot of my colleagues have made, is be thinking that, it'll just be another month, or there'll be a vaccination process for the society just around the corner. I'm afraid this may be with us for quite a while. And so I've started to shift my thinking around how we deal with it. The second major issue that we're facing is, frankly, fiscal. All 50 states have cut their funding for higher education, their public higher education institutions. The Ohio States, the Purdue's, the University of Iowa's, all of them have been cut by their states very dramatically over the last 25 years. Just to put one statistic on that, if you go back 25 years ago, almost 70% of our education funds came from the state of Iowa. Today, that's down to a little over 20%. That's a dramatic shift. And what's then happened has been a concomitant increase in tuition to replace that reduction from the state. And that now then has got everybody really worried about the high costs of education. And so that system is I think, close to breaking. The second fiscal issue we face is particularly in the middle part of the United States, we are actually starting to see enrollment declines, and that will continue over the next 10 or 15 years. Let me say that another way. It's not just enrollment declines. It's caused primarily because we're going to have fewer and fewer students graduating from high school in that age cohort. And that's got a lot of people concerned. Those will cause a shakeout. I'm pretty convinced of that. And then we have a set of other issues around research. I think we've forgotten that our university system, our so-called R1 class research institutions like ours, we came out of World War II as a nation and decided that there was going to be a compact, if you will, between the industrial complex and the universities. And that compact really had the basic research being the responsibility of institutions like ours. And so the health research, medical research, the engineering research, the NASA programs, the basic fundamental early stage research for many of those programs has been conducted across the universities in the United States. With this defunding and other fiscal issues, that's also waning. And so there's a race for research funding on top of the educational funding I just mentioned. And then I think with all of the issues going across our society, we have managed, in my opinion, to politicize everything. We've managed to politicize our K through 12 educational system. And sure enough, we're starting to politicize what we teach, how we teach in our higher education system. And those are pretty significant challenges. I face each one of them day in, day out. And I'm not so sure I'm smart enough to have answers, but we've got efforts going on all of those simultaneously. Long answer, but a really important question.
So much is packed into that answer, Bruce. Is our model broken? And you talk about the funding has changed. We're passing on some of those costs, a lot of those costs to our students and those in-state and out-of-state students. And it's a problem in terms of recruiting faculty when you don't have those funds. Is there a new model that we need to be looking at?
Yes, I think it is. I think it's close to being broken. I think it's completely broken, but I think there's hope. But I think it requires some, if you will, reimagining of the system. And I think the first place for the dialogue that we all need to go through is to ask ourselves, what's the role of higher education in our society? I don't think we have a good answer for that. I don't think we have a holistic answer to that. As I said, all 50 states have chosen in their state houses to defund higher education in their states. That's the beginning part of the issue. And in fact, if that's the value and we want to put more money into K through 12 or into the penal system or into the medical system, so be it. But that then requires that the public higher education institutions like ours really rethink what their funding base is. And if they don't, then I think we will find over time in our society that most of our higher education systems become private, become like the Harvards and Yales or Northwesterns. And I personally believe that's a problem. And I respect those institutions incredibly. I'm a product of one of them. But I must say, they don't do a great job focusing on the underrepresented first-generation students in our society. We still have a large number of families relative to other countries that do not have higher education degrees. So we've got some work to do. And part of that reimagining is something we've done in terms of looking for ways to monetize other assets on our campus. We have not only a large endowment, but we also now have a public-private partnership focused on our utility infrastructure that was built over the last 100 years. And we've actually done a transaction to put another $1 billion into our long-term strategic plan. So, and that's just one example. We need to reinvent, if you will, the way in which we fund these institutions.
Well, with your business consulting and academic background, I think you're in the right spot to make this all happen. And we're very lucky to have you pull together those minds and those organizations that can help us reimagine at Iowa. And so let me ask you in terms of where Iowa is today, in terms of its student enrollments, in terms of undergrad, the graduate level, and how is that compared to the Big Ten, and how are we doing?
Great question. When I started looking at this dynamic that we were just talking about 5 years ago. We were in a race like many of our peers in the Big Ten and other top institutions, academic institutions across the country, in a race to get larger and larger and larger. And I started staring at some of the numbers and I started realizing that as the state is defunding us, and I'm talking about substantial defunding over the last 25 years, maybe, in fact, size isn't the right answer. And so we've made some very conscious shifts. First of all, we've decided that we would actually take our size down, consciously take it down. Secondly, we decided that at our core, everything we touch academically and from a research perspective, it needs to be excellent, world-class excellent. And if we can't be world-class excellent, then in fact, we should find ways to focus ourselves on those activities that are. And so I often say to our alumni, and I'm sure you've heard me, Janice, say this in some of my public addresses, that size is not a strategy. Excellence is. And so we purposely, I remember 5 years ago, because we're just now, this week is our first week of classes, we had an enrollment of 5,400. And I walked over to our enrollment team with the Daily Iowan newspaper from that week. And I said, I don't ever want to see this headline again. And so this year, we're now down to, COVID-19's had a couple hundred impact as well. We can come back to that. But we're in the 48 to 4,600 range of where we want to be. And with that, we've also done two other things. One is we've shifted ever so carefully year by year an increase in our graduate and professional programs, our law schools, our business schools, our medical college, our dental college, pharmacy. We've very purposely said that's a place that we need to actually shift and put more emphasis behind. The other piece is I made an announcement, goodness, I think it was probably 4 years ago now, that we would always have at least 20% of our incoming students be first-generation students. I'm back to that issue of our societal role that I mentioned earlier. And so we're now in the 23, 24% in terms of first-generation students. And also focusing on their academic needs. And so we've been remixing strategically. Then to answer your question, we're the smallest these days in the Big Ten. We're quite proud of that. With that, is also allowed us to do some other things. It's taken pressure off of everything. It's taken pressure off of recruiting, of talent. It's allowed us to not have to build a lot of new dorms. It's allowed us to not have to build a lot of new classrooms. And little did we know we would now have this virus in front of us. But there's not a day that goes by that I don't say to somebody on my team, thank goodness we took the pressure off of enrollment, because we'd be in a much tougher spot, not only fiscally, but just infrastructure-wise if we hadn't done that.
Well, any good business leader knows it's not size, it is excellence, and it's really making sure that those that you're serving are getting the very best, and that's what you're doing. I want to remind our audience that we are listening to Higher Education in Crisis, Leading Forward Together with the University of Iowa's President Bruce Harreld. The topics we cover, like today's, are all current, and a new topic with a new game changer is released on the third Thursday of every month. It's a great way to stay current on relevant issues happening around us. And there is much happening around all of us, and particularly on university campuses. So let's return to President Bruce Harreld on what is happening at the University of Iowa. I'm interested to hear a little bit more about the student enrollment and what that means with students being in the classroom or online, and what you're seeing in terms of that percentage mix.
Sure. Early this summer, as we started thinking about bringing students back to campus, good leaders think about things in two different ways. I mean, one is you need to lead with the facts and use your mind and be analytical about it. And secondly, with your heart. And I will just say for myself, sometimes I get the heart piece a little lopsided, and you have to really work on it. You need people on your team who really say, what's the right thing to do? I know we've got this data that says this, but what's the real right thing to do in terms of our values? And as we started processing this reopening, we started realizing that it was really bimodal. There are a lot of families, there are a lot of students who really say, look, I am very fearful of this environment, the virus and all the things we don't know. We see the incredible deaths in the United States. And faculty in particular, or people of my age, are vulnerable. And similarly, the students have that same fear that's different. But then there are others that say, no, I really want the in-class experience. And so we said, how do we go through this? And to make a long story short, we decided to give people as much choice as we possibly could. And so we have totally let the free market work. We've said to our faculty, we've said to our staff, if you need to work from home or you don't want to teach a face-to-face course or want to convert your older course from face-to-face to online, we'll help you do that. We've also said to our students, if you don't feel comfortable coming back to campus, don't. We'll do something with you online. And so we're in a mode that we would probably call hybrid, and we've let people make that choice. I didn't really know how that would sort itself out. I can tell you as of right now, and it's still a little movement. We'll allow some movement for the first couple of weeks. I taught my first class yesterday, and it was interesting because you can see the students. We actually said during the class, drop us a note and tell us what you'd rather have this online or face to face. And last night I was looking at the returns, and it's kind of all over the place. And so now we've got to make a decision. I can come back to how we're going to do that. But to answer your question, right now we're at 72% of our courses in terms of student credit hours will be taught online. And we'll stay in that mode throughout this semester and continually reevaluate what we need to do for the spring semester. Our university also has a break in between those two. And we run a lot of programs, and I suspect most of those will also be virtual. It's going to really depend. The word flexibility has been high in our vocabulary these days. Whatever you think, I think if you asked us back in April and May where we would be, it would be online. It wouldn't be a problem. This virus would be behind us. We now know it isn't. So the best laid plans. We've been continually saying, we're planning for the worst and hoping for the best. And this is the mode we're still in.
Well, I've heard you say this. If you don't feel comfortable, stay at home. If you don't feel like you can come into the classroom, then the classes will be online. So you've given a lot of resources to the students and to the faculty in terms of making those choices. So that caring and compassion and great communications is really what leadership is all about. And I'm so happy to see you doing that. But when you look at Iowa, the cases have been fairly low with COVID-19, right? And yet, I think 53,000 and 1,000 deaths with no death is good, but it's low compared to other states. And yet you've taken extensive measures to protect the safety of students, faculty, and staff on campus. So can you comment on what those actions have been and what the state is right now in terms of cases?
Sure. I think your numbers are quite accurate. Please understand our population is a lot lower than the density you have in New York.
That's true.
Yeah. So, but when you look at it as a percent of the population or cases per 100,000, which is the metric everyone seems to be using these days, we're seeing a spike right now. Enough so that I actually reached out in the last few hours to talk to our governor about what she could do. And I think the interesting piece of this, we are a large country. We have a lot of differences in terms of culture, in terms of how diseases move through. And one thing we've been staring at is half our student body comes from outside of Iowa. And might they bring some of the virus and some of those cases with them? Yes, we're seeing that. Secondly, but it's not their fault. We're also seeing that the young adults do what young adults when I was their age also did, which is they go socialize in a lot of different venues all across our community. And we're seeing a spike as a result of that as well. And so it's not the serious, incredible numbers you had. On the other hand, percentage and relative to the population, it's pretty significant. So we can't ignore it. And to answer your question, we're doing, if I give you the list, we're the 3 W's, which is, wear your mask, watch your distancing, and wash your hands. That's just over and over and over. But then we've had to change classrooms. We've changed, reduced the density of our residence halls. We've even changed the air filtering in a lot of any building we could over the summer. We increased the air filtering and changed the airflows as much as we could. We even have our engineering group in rooms measuring airflows throughout the summer. And then we gave kits to everybody, kits of shields and masks. And then we did training. And then we had people, all of us went through training and the list goes on. And then I always say, I was talking to our students the other night and I say, hey, if I've forgotten something or we haven't thought of something that you think we should do, put it on the list. We'll do that too, because there's no playbook for this. We're all working together on creating that playbook on a daily basis. And I guess the final point I would say, Janice, on this is, in spite of all that, we have to keep everybody safe. And if we can't, then we'll go online. And that will be tough for a lot of students. I think it'll be tougher for the first generation in underrepresented minority groups. I worry a lot about that. Why do I say that? Because they don't have the support system back at home. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of sick of sitting in this chair looking at a screen and teaching or having meetings this way. It's hard to stay engaged.
It is. It is. It's just that, we're social animals. I'm sitting here in my office all alone. And I can't wait to go back to even a hybrid model of, half of us in at one time, wearing our masks. As you said, the 3 Ws, you have to take precautions. But I think when we do, as we've done in New York, I think it works. And as you're doing on campus there. So you've been really focused on first generation students coming to Iowa. You recently appointed interim director to guide diversity, inclusion, and equity efforts on campus. Were you prompted by some of the societal issues going on, the social unrest?
The honest answer is no, but okay. Now I am. I mean, we're picking up the pace. I've had a long concern about the divisiveness in our society. I grew up in Appalachia. I could see some of those, if you will, edges of our society. I'm almost 70 years old now, and I've gone through in my lifetime.
It's the new 50, Bruce.
Yeah, thank you. I've seen us go through these iterations several times, and it seems like every time we pay lip service to the process, and we don't make the fundamental necessary changes. Something we don't have time to talk about, but my course on leadership, we spend a lot of time talking about diversity of teams and how teams that look alike are not very creative and tend not to be as productive. Teams that are really diverse are incredibly creative and productive. And then we try to diagnose how that happens and why that happens. So I've had this notion a long time. And then I worked for an incredible organization, IBM, for 15 years. And we were very aggressive on the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so when I got here, and then when you couple that with the thought of what's the purpose of a public institution? Why would the state of Iowa give us each year, even though I'm complaining about them, the appropriatiness, they're still giving us over $200 million a year. Why on earth would they do that? Well, it's because of some of these economic and uplifting powers of education that I think our forefathers landed on. And we may be now getting close to needing to re-engineer that. But nevertheless, the reason a public institution like ours exists is to lift up a whole group of people. And so it's a humanitarian purpose. So we've been focused on that for several years. Now then, with the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, it's just put an afterburner underneath a lot of what we're doing. And I must be honest, I think our students are frustrated that I'm not moving fast enough. And you know what? I think they're right. And then I want to say, I always go back. The other night, I was talking to a group of them and saying, here's what we've done and here's what we're working on. I said, no, that's not enough. Go forward. Don't tell us what you're working on. Tell us what you're going to be working on. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
That's the problem of leadership. The more you get done, the more you got to do.
And the more inclusive you are, the more you're going to hear their suggestions.
Absolutely. And then trying to figure out how you take that passion that they have and turn it into something productive, as opposed to just the protests or just the emails. I mean, I got 412 emails this summer about issues on campus, and, God bless them. On the other hand, then what I say, hey, now let's do this. Well, that's another issue. So you have to figure out how to channel that energy.
But it's great that they're interested and they're giving you all that feedback. It shows that, they know that you're receptive to hearing them. And that's what you want. You want those ideas. You want that friendly protest. You want people to be able to express themselves. So let me turn to, I can't leave this discussion without my wonderful Hawkeyes and watching football at Kinnick Stadium. With football will not be played this fall. Big Ten is not playing. Iowa's not playing. It's a major financial impact. Give us your views about this decision. and the safe thing to do, the right thing to do? And where do you see us going with football?
Great question. An important question. Important question, not just because of the fiscal issues, but because of the cultural implications for our society. Football is an important part of our society, for good or for bad. We can have that discussion. But look, the Big Ten is a very unique conference. It's perhaps the only conference that is really run by the presidents and chancellors of the members, of 14 members of the Big Ten. I'm part of that group, obviously. I'm very active also as on the executive committee of the Big Ten. We met countless hours over probably from May, June, July. Just had a meeting at 7 o'clock this morning, as a matter of fact. As a group, we work quite well together. I should also say it's one of the few conferences where everything is shared equally. Equal voting. If Ohio State goes to national championship, they put their cost for that in the pool, and the revenues they get, we all share. So we share everything, and it's been that way for well over 100 years. So it's a unique group. And in that context, yes, I was deeply involved and expressed my concerns, and we debated intensely across the Big Ten. And at the end of the day, the Big Ten made a decision that said the myriad of values of processes of how you keep Big Ten athletes safe is so complex, so multidimensional, that the right thing to do right now is to take a pause. We took a pause originally in the spring. We spent most of the summer trying to figure out how to play the fall sports. And finally, we got to the point of saying, look, each one of these sports is so different that it deserves a pause in the fall. I was part of the team, part of the process, and fully support that. Having said that, we also recognized that that wasn't a good enough answer. And so we're still meeting, we're still working. We've had a team of medical and public health advisors. We've had a group of athletic directors. Our coaches are involved of trying to figure out of how we restart sports. We call it returning to competition. And we've got several groups. I'm on some of those, working on the details of how we create bubbles, how we test, how frequently we test, in some cases, how we might play the sport a little bit differently. And we're hopeful, I'm hopeful, that we're going to find a way, the word we're using in these sports, football, volleyball, other sports, is we postponed. And I'm very hopeful that before long, we're going to be able to see the virus decline. And then secondly, we're going to figure out, hopefully, a way to play these games safely. I almost said this earlier in this discussion, but these are very, very complex times. And I've lost my way in the early periods of this COVID-19 environment, trying to figure out, how do you do this? And finally, I realized there has to be one overarching principle, the guiding light. And for me, that was keeping everyone here safe. So we sent everybody home, we canceled classes, we went online. Now we're starting to figure out how to carefully open back up. We ran pilots over the summer in athletics and in research of how to open certain research labs up, how to play certain sports in a safe way. We're still obviously working on all those, but if we can't keep people safe, then we shouldn't open. And I think the same context is now the rule that we're all applying to thinking about collegiate athletics. And by the way, we're finding NBA is working on some of that, and the MLB has got a piece of that, and soccer, MLS is doing some of that. We're going to watch the NFL keep people hopefully safe. So we're working on it. They're working on it. I think we're learning pieces of this. And I'm really hopeful that the SEC and Big 12 and the ACC have a successful season and show us the way. We decided that we would rather keep our student athletes safe. I hear a lot of conversations about, to your point, we at the University of Iowa, that was canceling our fall sports was a $100 million decision. We announced last week we're closing permanently 4 sports. We've taken salaries down for our entire athletic department, including coaches on contracts. I've reduced my salary by 50%. So these are not inconsequential, cavalier, easy to make decisions. On the other hand, they're a lot easier to make if you say the intent is to keep everyone safe. And yes, we now have a $100 million problem. Let's go work on that and let's go figure that out. And if, that's why we're here, to be honest, as leaders.
Well, I think we're going to see a lot more in the press with other schools, and we are reading about it now, and so I commend you and everybody at the university for your contribution. Your communication and your compassion during these times has been phenomenal. So I think a lot of that gives us comfort in terms of now how do we go forward and solve other problems that we know are right around the corner. And so I wanted to ask any parting words to our audience in terms of the whole area of education and how we can be helpful, what partnerships may be needed. Anything you would like to say, just in closing?
I would ask anyone who's listened to this to just think about the issue of what's the role of higher education in our society. I'd like you to think also about a subset of that. What's the role of public education? I think those are pretty important questions. And we're now in an election season as we go through electing people for our state legislatures, federal offices, and all the rest. As you know, Janice, we had the 16th president, Sandy Boyd of the University of Iowa, who's still with us. I meet with him frequently, and he said, "Hey, look, you need to do a much better job, young man, of pushing these prospects, the electoral prospects, on the issue of how they see higher education in our society, because it's vital for the long-term success." And I think he's absolutely right. And so I would end on the note of, look, I think we've got an incredible future in front of us, but it won't be by just doing the same things we've been doing for the last 100 years. We've got to rethink a number of these components. And I think they're all solvable, but we need a partnership with the political base, industrial base. I didn't spend any time talking about the research side, but the issue of, most of our basic research, the technology we're using right now to communicate, the way those electrons move came from basic research done at major universities. So it's not like we can shut this thing down for individuals or for our economy. And so the issue, I think, becomes, how do we help it move forward and rethink some of the way in which it governs itself, the way in which it sets new priorities, the way it funds itself. So I'll end on that. Thank you very, very much.
That's great. So President Harrell, thank you for joining us and sharing your impressive career, bringing an incredible amount of experience as an educator, a business leader, a consultant, and a true game changer on how we can reimagine education to really positively impact society overall for all groups of people without compromise. To our audience today, I'm really glad you were listening, because Bruce has brought some insightful and informational facts to us that I don't think many of us knew before about higher education in crisis and leading forward together. I am truly honored to be part of your vision at the University of Iowa and all you're doing to help the students, the faculty, the staff, the state, and the nation overall. Hopefully soon I will be in person out there again and we'll be saying, "Go Hawks."
Can't wait to see you. Go Hawks.
I know, and being in the stadium and waving to the children in the Children's Hospital. So thank you for your leadership, Bruce. It's a pleasure to be working with you. And I say that on behalf of the entire board. We really enjoy working with you. So thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you to our audience for tuning in to another game-changing conversation on Leadership Reimagined. You can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or visit our website at elegroup.com. Bruce, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Go Hawks.
Right.